To those of you who are new to the Net Zero Network, it's worth a quick explanation about what the Net Zero Network is all about. So we're a number of different things. We're an online group, a LinkedIn group, which has got nearly 500 members, where we share ideas about how we can all do our part in reducing emissions, either through our personal lives and the behavioral changes that we make, or probably more importantly, what we can do professionally to create systemic change, which is where in many ways, the real impact is. We also are a in-person meetup, so we have these sorts of meetings where we hear from inspiring speakers, people like John, who talk on particular subjects related to reducing emissions. And sometimes, mainly driven by me, we're also a book club, because I like reading up on everything related to the energy transition and then sharing those ideas with people. The book that I've been reading at the moment is the one which you see on the right here, The Superpower Transformation. So this is the follow-up to a 2019 book by a guy called Ross Garnaut, an economist who is very widely read by Australian policymakers. So worth reading for that reason, if nothing else, because it'll tell you what the government is thinking about the energy transition. And The Superpower Transformation is the follow-up book, which is edited by him. So there's lots of interesting stuff in there about how we can use the renewable resources available to Australia to build ourselves into an economic powerhouse over the next 50 years. And it's inspiring stuff. It means that we would go from being a which is causing 4 to 5% of global emissions, once you account for the oil and gas and coal which we dig up and which is combusted in other places, to one which could actually be reducing emissions globally by 7% by using the renewable energy which we generate to either develop products here, which is zero emission or low emission, or by exporting that renewable energy as electrons to our Asian neighbours, or as molecules as hydrogen and its derivatives to other places around the world. So it's an exciting future, and it relies on the development of some significant infrastructure in order to support that vision. This is a picture which comes out of the latest Superpower Transformation book. The dotted line, which is a sideways figure of 8, which you see there, is the view of what a high voltage DC transmission network around Australia could look like. So at the moment we have what's happening on the west of Australia, that's one electricity grid, then we have one which runs up the east coast. And that transmission connection at the moment is a high voltage AC connection. So traditional high voltage AC power lines, the trouble with those is after a certain distance, you start to get significant drops in the amount of power that you're transmitting, so you don't get as much out one end as the other. High voltage DC solves that problem. You have much lower transmission losses, but it's a much newer technology, it's expensive, and it's expensive to turn the power back into usable power at the other end. But it's this kind of nation-building project which is required if we're to achieve the status of being a renewable energy superpower. And to think about the costs associated with this, because we're going to be talking about finance today, the forecast cost of this in the book is about $75 billion, which is quite a lot. But for comparison, a similar nation-building project, the Future Submarine Programme, is an $80 to $90 billion programme at least. So big changes, potentially, are coming. But the big question is, can we do it? Can this actually happen? We'll be looking back in 30 years and saying, wow, we've achieved this transformation in Australia. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this last week, and his initial conclusion was actually somewhat disheartening. So he had just come from another meeting, which was with various senior people within the state, in the resources sector, the oil and gas sector. And the predominant view, he said in that meeting, was it was very nice that people were talking about renewable energy and potential renewable energy-driven future, but come back to reality. The reality is we're in WA. What do? We do big rock, little rock, ship. And that is the basis of our economy. So at the moment, fundamentally, we achieve our wealth from iron ore and from the exports of raw materials, and also a bit from oil and gas extraction as well. But it doesn't actually always have to be that way, because it hasn't always been that way. I mean, what may feel totally unchanging for the last 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, if you go back longer, it's actually always been changing. So iron ore was only first exported from the Pilbara in, I think it was the mid-1960s. The LNG industry is, what, a few decades old? Probably 3 decades old, right? So these are the economic basis of WA as it is today, but it doesn't have to be the economic basis of WA in the future. And of course, those emissions, those industries have emissions associated with them as well. So we want to move to this new future. One other example of how we've seen historic and significant change is to look back at the development of global GDP between 1815 and about 1930. And the thing that I'm keen to point out here is we've got all these different regions of the world, but the one which really explodes between about 1860 and 1930 is the United States. That's the second bar up from the bottom. So what drove that? Well, lots of different things, the incredible natural resources of the United States, but energy was a really big part of it. So in Titusville, Pennsylvania, in 1859, the very first commercial oil well was drilled in the US. That led to an oil rush there and then in other places around the US. That really fueled the US economy, led to population growth, led to a massive expansion of the wealth of that country. I went to a talk last week where Kate Cheney, the Perth Independent MP, talked about the concept of historical pivot points. So you don't always have this just linear progression of change over time, but there are certain points where things really flick and change really quickly. And you could argue that that discovery of oil in the US in 1859 was a little bit like that. That was a point where the US economy was going along in a certain direction, and then powered by all this new supply of energy, really shot off in a different direction, led to the growth of the global superpower, which is the United States today. We can also think about ourselves as being in a pivot point like that at the moment. I think it would be hard to argue against the fact that we're in this transformational point of the energy transition where so much is going to change. And for Western Australia and Australia, that could mean taking us in various different directions. So one way in which we could go, which would be the direction of the people who my colleagues spoke to at lunch the other day, would be to double down, to do more of the same. So to be the last gas producer standing, to continue just to export raw materials. But the other future, and I expect the future that we're all most interested in since we're here in this meeting today, is one where we take advantage of all these renewable energy resources that we have available to us, as well as the finance and the expertise in our state and in our country. And we use all of that to build the future which we want, which is a diversified, zero-emission economy for our kids. So when we think about being at that pivot point, you can think about how that could be just a nudge in one direction or another, which can create each of those different alternative futures. And that idea that we're at a point where just the little nudges could be the important thing, the straw which breaks the camel's back, is one of the reasons why the Net Zero Network chose climate literacy in WA as the theme which we wanted to focus on over the next 12 months. Because we felt like if we can increase the level of understanding of the risks from climate change in WA, but also the opportunities available to the state, then we can impact people in the conversations that they have with others, and ultimately those other people could be business leaders and policymakers, and that can take us towards the green path. The other way in which we can use our personal impact to make a difference is that we can use the resources available to us. And of course, one of those resources is our financial resources. When I first moved here from the UK in 2006, I was a bit surprised that 9% of my salary was taken away and put somewhere else at superannuation. But in retrospect, it's a great thing. I've got quite a decent sized super fund now. And so we've all got this capability to invest our super, and I'm sure other things which John will talk to us about as well. So just before I hand over to John to tell us more on that subject, I'd just like to explain what we're going to do after we've heard from John, and then we've had a chance to do a Q&A with him. We're then going to have a discussion facilitated by Alan, with a few ideas thrown in by me, about a couple of things related to the direction of the Net Zero Network, which would be great to get everyone's feedback on. So information about what we want to put onto the website, which groups we should be connecting with, and what kind of speakers you want to hear from next. So John, it's your cue. Come on up.